everybody that's on today, if I'm getting my time zones correct. And as Adam said, wanted to spend the little bit of time we have together talking about one area that the coalition has been focusing recently, which is how are we going to pay for our transportation system kind of in the long term, and what's our long-term solution. And before I dive into this, what I wanted to touch on is kind of where is the challenges with our transportation, kind of what are these kind of currents of change that are happening right now that are leading to this exploration of a sustainable funding option. So first thing we want to talk about is our customers. Our drivers are changing. I have young children. I can already tell they're going to be a very different user of our transportation system than me. We have drivers that want more choices. They talk about mobility, not just driving. They want to be much more aware of costs of their options. So our drivers are in essence much more sophisticated. So what we're being asked to do as transportation professionals is really respond to our changing drivers as we move forward with solutions. And then technology, there's no doubt that we're still feeling the effects of a technology. I would call it almost a tsunami that has hit our transportation field, and it's a good thing as far as solutions making our vehicles safer, our transportation infrastructure safer, and again, having our customers demand more information using technology. And then the other piece that leads to kind of the topic for today is funding. So we have our drivers that are changing, technology is changing, and we're facing a very strong funding challenge for our field. So diving into that a little bit more, when I say about funding, our funding is changing, or at least our ability to rely on our historical way of funding our system is changing. So this graph here is basically to put a picture to everything, to something that we all know, which is that our vehicles are getting more efficient. Fantastic for our personal wallets. We can drive farther on less fuel, but not so good if fuel taxes is what our system is dependent on. In addition, we have the fleet is changing. So we have vehicles that are not paying for the transportation system at all. So we have EVs and hybrids that are paying less. So in essence, with those two things working together, our funding, or kind of our dependence on fuel tax is getting unsustainable. And then an element that I think doesn't get enough attention when we talk about funding is our customers. Those drivers really have no idea how little that they do pay for the use of our roads and bridges and sidewalks and subways and buses. And there's an analysis that, I don't know if anyone's met Richard Perrin. He used to be the head of the MPO in Rochester. So he did this back of the envelope calculation once, and it always stuck in my mind, which is basically our federal fuel tax. So just look at that one piece. How much people pay for that is basically a cup of coffee a week. I'm not talking about a fancy Starbucks. I'm talking about just a regular cup of Joe, $2 a week, a little over $100 a year. So it's very hard for us to have a national transportation system dependent on this eroding source. So we need to get a new approach to make sure that we have the system that we need for our economy and our quality of life. So you might be wondering, why did I come up with those three circles? What is that really about? So it really is looking at those currents and saying, okay, what are the solutions? What are new things that we can do given that our customer is changing, that our technology is changing, and the way we fund our system is changing? So what we're looking at is how does the intersection of those areas, what comes out of there? What solutions, what opportunities are there? So I'm going to focus mainly today on the mileage-based usage fee, which I think most people know that term. Basically, the idea is to take the computer that we drive around in. So I don't know if folks know when they go and take their car into the mechanic, they stick a probe in their computer and basically in your vehicle, in the computer. But there's this big firewall between us and the computer. So the question is, what if we actually open up that dialogue between the computer and our vehicle and the driver? In essence, it's like turning our car into a Fitbit. So for a mileage-based usage fee, the very simple way of describing the concept is it's moving from how much fuel you purchase to how many miles you drive. And why there's been more activity and discussion about a mileage-based usage fee or a distance-based approach, I do give Congress a lot of credit for creating a grant program in the FAST Act, a 5-year program in which they encourage states to do demonstration pilots to look at distance-based, a user-based approach to transportation. So when the coalition, we learned about that, we went ahead and applied and won 4 of these grants. And so that's the kind of some of the findings I'm going to share with you today. So why did the coalition do this? So again, the coalition were the gathering of the Eastern Seaboard states. And we're different. We have a lot of states that are small right next to each other. So we really wanted to make sure that this national discussion talked about out-of-state miles. So the way goods and people move is not simple. So we wanted to make sure the complexities of small states that really interact with each other was addressed in this national discussion. In addition, we wanted to make sure tolling was part of the conversation. We have a lot of toll facilities on the East Coast. And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn about interoperability between tolling facilities, things that we didn't do right the first time. How can we do it better if we move from a fuel tax to a distance-based approach? And also, I'm kind of a believer that change is hard. So if we're going to ask people to make this change, what can we offer in exchange for this change? So is there something in the vehicle people want to know about? Their battery health. I have young kids, as I said. So one day when we used to drive them to school, I got into my car, turned the ignition, dead battery. It really did not start my day off well. It would have been much better if I had known that. And if we have this approach, then this is the kind of information that drivers would have. And finally, the coalition, we did not see a strong presence of the motor carrier. Their unique circumstances, they're heavy users, heavily regulated, basically contributors as well to our transportation system. And most of the work in this space was on passenger vehicles. So we wanted to make sure the motor carrier voice and concerns and input was involved in this. So what have we done? Back in 2018 in our first grant, we basically started the conversation. We wanted to get elected officials, thought leaders, national organizations based on the East Coast engaged in this, in the demonstration pilot, and see what it's really like to have technology in your car that would be used for an MBUF system. And then this next year we said, okay, that's our kind of industry experts and national thought leaders. What about the public? What does the public think about this? We know there's a knowledge gap as far as what the public thinks that they pay and they do pay. How would they respond to this? So we really focused on bringing the public's voice into this exploration in our 2019 pilot. In addition, actually, let me go over these results first. So looking at the two passenger pilots, again, talking about out-of-state miles. I live in Maryland right now. I can drive between DC and Virginia really easily, but now we have some data from these pilots that show there's a pretty high percentage, 13 to 20% of out-of-state miles. So what that tells us is a national approach for that sustainable transportation funding has got to figure out how to manage out-of-state miles. In addition, and this is probably, to me, one of the most interesting findings that we had, again, this is our first pilot was people who are in the field, including myself. I was in that first pilot, and the general public in the second pilot. Everyone learned about how transportation is funded. Again, it's just invisible right now. So if we're going to make a change, we really need to have a very strong educational outreach campaign about what transportation funding looks like. So we saw a lot of people learning and a lot of people thinking that they actually paid more. So again, is that an opportunity for our field to get the resources that we need? Looking at the tolling, interaction between tolling and MBUF, we wanted to ask people, does that seem reasonable to pay both? And we got a pretty majority of folks do think that's reasonable. You pay a fuel tax and tolling right now. So that was an interesting finding. So two others to go over: privacy. That is the number one thing that comes up when we talk about a distance-based fee. Oh, the tracker tax, something in my vehicle, Big Brother, et cetera. But when we find when people are participating in these pilots, when they see how the account manager is set up and where their data goes, how it's protected for them, the concerns for privacy drops. And I always confess when I talk about this subject that I'm a total data geek. This is an incredibly statistical change in a very short amount of time. So for those survey folks out there, seeing 57 to 30% change is pretty notable. So we really see privacy concerns dropping in both of our pilots. And finally, we ask everyone as a result, do they feel that MBUF is a sustainable approach going forward or not? And we see very high support when people, again, have the real world experience in a pilot. They say, okay, this makes sense to me. The more you use, the more you pay. So those are really key findings that we found from our work. Switching gears to the motor carrier, again, we had a multi-state truck pilot. That's the first in the country to really look at how freight moves. And so we had, again, a small pilot is kind of how we start to kind of build knowledge and momentum, and then we grow from there. So this pilot was 55 vehicles. But one thing about trucks, they drive a lot. So those 55 vehicles in 6 months drove 1.4 million miles. And also they covered quite a few states going across 27 borders. So what did we find from the truck pilot? So we're about ready to release our report on this. So you guys are I think the first group to hear about this. So you're the first ones. So maybe we should have a drum roll or something. So first it is important to bring that motor carrier voice in. Trucks, they have very complex operating environment. It's a very tough profit margin area or business, excuse me. So how do we make sure that their challenging environment is addressed in this national change? So we really saw that was very important to bring them to the table. There are existing regulations. Folks may have heard of the International Fuel Taxation Agreement, or called IFTA, and IRP and ELD. These are some fun acronyms that we throw out. But the point is there's approaches and regulations now that really are a framework for MBUF. So let's not reinvent. Let's see how we can use those. This is actually a very important finding. I'll have a graph that touches a little bit on this. Basically, one rate won't work for trucks. The concept for passenger vehicles is there'll be one rate. That's the general idea right now. So we applied that same approach to trucks, and it doesn't work because you have such large miles driven by individual vehicles, and the fuel efficiency of those vehicles changes quite a bit by the company and by the type of movement that truck is doing. So having one rate would very much penalize companies that are investing in fuel efficient fleets, and it would reward companies that have older, less fuel efficient fleets. So that was a very important finding, is one rate will not work for trucks. Similar to the public and the passenger vehicle work is the conclusion. We got to do a lot of communication, a lot of education and outreach. And then finally, this kind of concept, I guess is a good way to summarize all this, is we cannot treat the motor carrier industry and an MBUF for trucks the same as we would for passenger vehicles. And again, I've said I like data, so I had to have at least a couple graphs in here. So this is one that I think is just visually very telling. And I appreciate Washington State Commission is the one who came up with something like this first. So I quickly copied the idea. This just tells you in a year how much more in fuel first that the trucks are paying for, and also how much more in fuel and state taxes, fuel taxes they're paying compared to passenger vehicles. And it also shows you that point I was making, that trucks are different from each other. And so we need to think through that complexity when we look at a national approach for MBUF. I know we wanted to save some time for some questions, so I'm just going to wrap up with a couple more slides, excuse me. Some folks on the phone may not know, or on this web may not know who the coalition is. Adam did mention we just changed our name recently. So the I-95 Corridor Coalition, which is our formal name, we've been around for 25 years, and it's basically a group of state DOTs, MPOs, tolling authorities, public officials looking to make freight and passenger movement work better in one of the busiest corridors. So we've been around for 25 years, so our name has changed, who we are has not, and kind of where we are has not. We do have two new states, of Tennessee and Alabama, though. And the reason I have this slide up here is why these states are working together is because of just the important economic engine the transportation serves in this corridor. And so that's why all these states and agencies are motivated to work together to make it work better. As far as like what we do, we bring people together for training, for best practice sharing, to find solutions. We make sure people have access to data and tools, and then we just bring more resources to agencies. So what I like to say, it's like a moth to the flame. The stickier and harder the issue is, the more the coalition gravitates towards it. And figuring out how to fund our transportation system for the future is definitely an example of a pretty challenging situation. So this is just a structure who we are. We do a lot of TSMO work, freight, and innovation is where our mileage-based usage fee work is. So in essence, working together to connect for solutions. And that was kind of the last slide I had to go over. And the point, again, kind of bringing it back to these three circles, is mileage-based usage fee is just one thing that is going to come out of these kind of currents of change that are happening in our industry. So I'm hoping, and it's harder to do on a technology like this than in person, but it'd be great to hear, like, what else do you think is going to come out of this area? Connected autonomous vehicles is one of them. What new partners are we going to need to do in order to serve our changing customers, to address technology and funding? how do we use data better, and how do we maximize our system? So kind of wondering what you guys think. But if that, I will, I guess, turn it back over to Adam, to you for any questions that have come up in the chat box.
Trish, thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure. I've had issues with my audio connection coming in. Can everyone still hear me okay? Okay, great. Just making sure. I've had a couple questions come in. I had a couple too, but I'll defer that until after the others. One that came in was a question on private automakers. Have they provided feedback? Will they be the main providers of the hardware and software for MBUF?
So great question, and that is an area I think that more work needs to be done. So the Auto Alliance is on our kind of steering committee for this effort to try to figure that exact question out, which is, what is the role of the auto manufacturers, the OEMs, in this future technology? And the person who asked the question may be aware, we have companies like Audi that in the rearview mirror now have basically a toll tag. So getting technology into vehicles, as we know, is a huge opportunity for auto manufacturers. The question is, how would a mileage-based usage fee technology fit into what they want from the vehicle? And you can probably imagine that they don't really want that data to be shared. They want to keep it. So I think in general, that question touches on a conflict that as a country, we're going to have to figure out. Who owns the data in the car? Is it for safety? So if we look at automated and connected vehicles, is it the driver? Is it the DOT? Is it the local mobility provider? Is it the auto manufacturing company? So kind of probably a longer answer than you were anticipating, but it is a key question, and we are working with several companies to ask them, can we just test some technology in your car? Come to the table. That's kind of the overall message with this, with our work. We want people who hate this idea, who love the idea, and everything in between. So the auto manufacturers are ones that are kind of at a distance, but we're trying to pull them in.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in was on the issue of privacy concerns. You mentioned that there were changes in how the public perceives issues with potential privacy under the MBUF model. This is sort of a complicated question, it seems. Have the changes in privacy concerns from the public over MBUF been different than the changes over time relative to electronic toll collection like EasyPass? Have they even really changed at all? And the reason that it seems to be asked is I actually happened to notice either earlier this week or late last week, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission is proposing a really high increase in their toll rates for toll by mail, right, hoping that they'll get that remaining percentage of drivers to use EasyPass. And so do you think that might change the trends in the privacy over MBUF versus electronic toll collection? Is there any interrelationship between the two?
Okay, Adam, you made the question even more complicated there by the end. So let me try to piece that out a little bit. So I think that privacy is a loaded term, so we probably should be more specific when we talk about it. At first, it was wanting to protect your individual information. You want to, if I'm participating in a pilot, I want to make sure somebody can't find out that I went to the vineyard with my husband to celebrate our anniversary. I don't want anyone else to know that. So privacy of where I go, when I go, is something that's very important. And what we see from the pilot is everyone realizes very quick that that information is protected. It never gets to the big brother or the government. It's always a private company, which we're ironically much more comfortable at sharing our information with private companies. And then there's agreement, at least in our pilot, that that data gets destroyed. So that's privacy, right? But then the thing that we've noticed is the data security is going up in concern. What will private companies do with my data? How will they basically use my data, repackage it, and sell it for a profit? Or will they use my data to do something else? So the kind of use, maybe I'm blurring a little bit, use of data security is more of a growing concern. I think the privacy we can address, but the data security is one that is growing. So then you talked about getting people to be open to technologies, where the third piece I would say, Adam, with the Turnpike saying, okay, if you don't use technology, we're going to charge you a lot more, right? That's in essence what they're saying. And I think that is a trend we're seeing across many industries. If you use technology, You will have discounts. It will make your life easier and whatever it is that you're engaged in easier. So I could see something like that happening with a mileage-based usage fee, that if you have a choice, no technology, an annual fee that you just mail has to be set pretty high, or else everybody will use that option. So hopefully I touched on all aspects of that question, but I think you have to be careful with saying what privacy really means. Is it people know your personal business, or is it data security and separating those, which I didn't do as good a job on. And then I think just the move towards bringing more technology into our everyday life is just what's going to happen.
Our next question that came in was on technology. Does GPS provide lane level accuracy to identify toll road use that runs parallel to a general purpose lane? The example is in Europe, this was the main challenge in implementation, at least back in 2012, and they were waiting for the Galileo satellites to address that issue. Is there any initiative in the US to upgrade GPS satellites?
All right, that is another awesome question. That's a very specific question, and we are looking at just that. So when I talked about that, I didn't talk too much about the tolling work that we've done so far. So let me dive into that for a minute. So what we wanted to know is, can a mileage-based usage fee technology accurately estimate tolls? And the answer is yes, for most toll facilities, except those facilities that are right next to your general purpose lane, the exact question that was just asked. And the answer is it is not specific enough. So what we're trying to do in our phase 3 work, which we're starting now, is, okay, if it can't work, how can you geocode it? Like, what else can we do? And then you might be wondering, okay, wait a second, you're talking about replacing a fuel tax. Why would you use this technology to collect tolls? Well, why not, right? So why not try to maximize what we could do with this new technology? So we're really trying to explore what else this technology can do. And I'll go off on a tangent here because we're all transportation professionals, and what do we say is our number one important thing? Safety. I mean, imagine if this technology can help people be more safe. If it has a way to provide you feedback on your driving behavior. And I bring this up because we had a thank you note, in essence, written to us and our general public pilot saying, you helped my mom be safer. I don't know why it's always the mom, right? So this son was concerned that his mom was a really heavy breaker and dangerous driver. So we had her sign up for the pilot and then showed her the kind of feedback that this technology can give. And as a result, he felt he had his mom is driving safer. So I kind of merged there this, can we use MBUF for tolling? Can we use it for safety? Again, that trend of this technology that's coming into our field, how do we best utilize it to fund our system, to make it more safe? I think there's a lot of opportunity that we're trying to take these grants to basically kick the tires of these concepts. So stay tuned for that answer, or more answer. Right now, we can't do it on the general purpose against the tolling lanes, but we're working on seeing if there's a way to do it.
And then it looks like we might have time for one or two more. We had one other one come in. This seems like a pretty high level question, but what do you see as the biggest hurdle, and what will be the last piece of the puzzle before widespread implementation?
Oh my gosh, that's like the meaning of life question. All right, who asked that one, right? That was you? I had a feeling that was you. All right, there we go.
I wasn't originally planning on calling out specific people for the questions, but if he's willing to admit it, we can just roll with it.
He said he did it. So the answer is a really squishy one. What we have found from the surveys we give during the participant pilots, during our statewide surveys about people's understanding of transportation funding, and in our focus groups, it is one very clear response that we have got to do a value of transportation campaign, which is hard because I don't know what it is about our field. We stink at this. Like, we're the reason why food gets to people's doors, like people get to the hospital. We're the reason why our economy works, but we just do a really bad job of bringing that value and that importance to people because we have to start there first. So to get the answer is, the hurdle is you got to get people to even care, even know that we have this transportation system that everyone walks out their front door and they assume it's there. That's not true in a lot of countries, but it is true here. So we have to do the work to say, look, transportation is part of everyday life. It makes your life better. It connects you to quality of life. And then we can say, by the way we're funding it is not working, and we need you to be part of it. The more you use, the more you pay, and then you can go on from there. But it's that initial hurdle that we've struggled with for a long time. So that's why it's a tough answer to the life question you just asked.
We are just coming up on 4 o'clock. I know we started a minute or so late, and I haven't seen any other questions come in. Scratch that. One last question that we can get if you don't mind sticking around for just a minute. Do you see participation with or by big data generators such as INRICs and insurance companies?
So the technology that's being used right now in these pilots is actually from the pay-as-you-go insurance model. So that's, everyone probably knows you have an OBD2 port, and that's where that device goes. What is it, Flo? What is the woman's name who's the insurance lady? Progressive? Is her name Flo? Anyone? Okay, Adam is nodding. So this concept is not new. This concept being using the computer to basically create a market for it. But that has not overly taken off in our country. So the answer is there are companies that are looking at the computer in your car and looking at you as a driver and thinking, how do I create a market for it? So that's more on the insurance side. On the INRIC side, so the way that they gather data about, speed and reliability and where people are is not this technology. So we work with them quite a bit, and I don't see them as, who knows, if we change the way we fund our system, I would think every company that has their fingertips in transportation and a big data generator would be interested. But right now, I have not seen that from them. But you can tap them on the shoulder and say that they should pay attention.
Fantastic. Thank you for the flexibility on that last question, just as sort of the closing and the question overlapped. I saw that we had one come in. What I'd like to do is I'll hold on to that question. I'll copy it. And if you don't mind, maybe we could discuss that over email and try to address that person's question offline, if you don't mind. But I did want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today, and to everyone who was able to join us for this event. It really means a lot that we were all able to get together virtually and see some of our faces in these trying times, but discuss a topic that even, in a time that strains the economy a little bit, makes things challenging, is an extra important topic to consider. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you to Trish. We'll certainly follow up with you. We'll be sure to share emails for the professional development credits and be on the lookout for the recording as well, that we'll be able to share online with others as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah.